ChatGPT said, if you want to know the truth about yourself, sometimes it takes a wild horse, a stranger, in a valley that's been holding its breath for years. I should know. 3 days ago, I watched the world tilt right under my feet when a man nobody knew tamed the devil horse of Cinder Valley. A horse every cowboy swore couldn't be ridden. The story started as a joke. Or so we all thought, with me, Lark Hollis, laughing as I promised to marry whoever could gentle midnight mercy. People roared. The idea was so outlandish, so dangerous, it was practically a dare. Then Trace stepped forward, quiet, eyes shadowed by a battered hat, and walked straight into the corral like he'd been born for this moment. Whispered something only the stallion could hear. And I swear the air changed, like a summer storm about to break. I should have run right then, but I didn't. I stood there with my heart in my throat, watching Midnight Mercy lower his head and nuzzle that stranger's hand. And in that instant, the whole valley seemed to stop. Trace turned to me and said, "Name's yours if you want it." The laughter died. Suddenly, the promise wasn't funny anymore. Suddenly, the world was full of possibility and risk. After that, Trace settled into ranch life so smoothly it was almost suspicious, like he'd always belonged. My father, Jeremiah Hollis, watched him with the wary respect of a man who's seen too much and trusts too little. The hands accepted him. Nobody could ignore the way horses quieted when Trace was near, or how he worked from dawn till dark without complaint. But none of us really knew him, not even me. We were a family built on hard ground and harder choices. My grandfather had carved our ranch from the wilderness with nothing but grit, turning Hollis land into the largest operation in 3 counties. Everything about our life was built to last. Ornate iron gates, traditions older than the hills. A reputation I wore like a coat too heavy for my shoulders. At 24, folks whispered I was past my prime, especially since Thomas McBride, the golden boy next door, had made his interest clear. He was everything respectable, safe, predictable, and I felt like I was suffocating. The day after the barn raising, the house felt different, charged with something unspoken. Over coffee and biscuits, my father tried to sound casual, but the edge in his voice gave him away. "Makes a man wonder what kind of past produces skills like that," he said, eyes sharp. I dodged the question, and Maria, our housekeeper, more family than staff since my mother died, jumped in with her own observations. "Sometimes a man's actions speak louder than his name," she said, cracking eggs into a skillet. That stuck with me. Outside, I found Trace in the corral with Midnight Mercy, not riding, just standing close, hand on the horse's neck. He was never truly wild. "Just misunderstood," Trace said. He spoke about horses the way some folks speak about old friends. He never rushed, never forced. When I pressed him about how he knew what to say to Mercy, he just smiled, that distant sadness in his eyes. Life teaches you, if you pay attention. I wanted to ask about his scars, the stories behind his silence, but the words died on my tongue. That's when Thomas showed up, immaculate as always, riding a sorrel gelding. He made his pitch, all confidence and expectation, inviting me for a ride, promising pleasant company, hinting at a future lined with comfort. I tried to refuse gently, but he pressed on, not used to being told no. There was a steel in his politeness, the certainty of a man used to having his way. When my father arrived, pleased as punch at the thought of a McBride-Hollis union, I realized the script had already been written for me, and I was just expected to read my lines. That night at the McBride's dinner, I felt like a ghost in my own life, surrounded by polite conversation and the unspoken understanding that my choices were everyone's business but mine. All I could think about was the man who'd changed everything with a whisper and a wild horse. The next morning, Trace was packing his saddle. "You're leaving?" I blurted out, panic surprising me. "Time to move on," he said, voice flat. My father's question about whether Thomas had anything to do with it hung in the air. Trace didn't answer, but we all knew. Maria, sensing the storm, forced coffee into his hands and demanded he sit. "The horses trust you, the men respect you. You run from scared feelings." She said it with a wink, but everyone heard the truth. Trace tried to insist that moving on was kindness, that staying too long caused complications. "What kind?" I asked, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable. "The kind that follow a man whether he wants them to or not." It hit me then that he wasn't just running from something. He was running for someone. Just then, riders approached. 3 men, faces hard, hands near their guns. The leader, Marshal Stevens, produced a wanted poster, and even from across the room I could see the lines of Trace's face in the sketch. Jeremiah lied to the marshal, risking everything. Trace vanished, a ghost again, but the hunt was on. I found him in the shed, saddling a bay. "Are you wanted by the law?" I demanded. He told me the truth, at least enough to know he'd been framed for another man's crime, another judge's shame. "You're innocent," I said, and he gave me a bitter smile. Innocence doesn't matter much when the man writing the warrants wants you dead. We both knew what was coming, but I wasn't ready to let him go. I hid him, lied for him, risked everything because for the first time in my life, my heart wouldn't let me do otherwise. The marshals left empty-handed, thanks to Midnight Mercy's timely performance. My father confronted me. "You realize what you've done?" he asked. "The law isn't always right," I shot back. He nodded. "No, but it's still the law." The weight of my choice settled on me. The valley depended on us, dozens of families, half the local economy. I'd put all that at risk for a man I'd known less than a week. But when he asked if I'd want someone to help me, if I were innocent, I couldn't answer, because the truth was, I already had. That evening, I found Trace at the old line shack by the river, working a bridle his grandmother had made. The air was thick with memory and hope. We talked about running, about belonging, about the scars you carry when the world tries to break you. When I kissed him, it wasn't a promise. Just a question: "Are you brave enough to stop running?" He didn't answer, but I saw hope in his eyes. The valley wasn't ready to let us be. The next day, Margaret McBride and her entourage came to pry. Their questions as sharp as their smiles were sweet. "You're ruining yourself for a ghost," Margaret hissed. I held my ground, but inside I was shaking. Jose rescued me, and I went to my father, only to find more bad news. Judge Hartwell was sending a federal marshal, the kind who doesn't take no for an answer. The threat was clear. Trace had become the most dangerous man alive to some very powerful people, because he held a journal that could topple an empire of corruption. When 5 riders arrived, we played for time, using every trick we knew. Trace slipped away, heading for the mountains, leaving me with a note. "Trust your father. Trust Morrison. I'll find you when it's safe." My father revealed the truth. Trace had evidence that could bring down Hartwell and his network, but it meant we were in a fight much bigger than us. We rode hard for Denver, risking everything to reach Morrison, the one federal prosecutor who might be honest enough to help. In Denver, everything changed. Trace revealed himself as Thomas Blackhorse, a federal marshal working deep undercover, framed for murder to expose the truth. My world spun. Everything I'd felt, every decision I'd made, suddenly stood in a different light. "Your courage honors your mother's memory," my father said. "But Elizabeth wouldn't want you to sacrifice yourself for any cause, no matter how just." I squeezed the locket at my throat and smiled. "I'm not sacrificing. I'm fighting back." As the plan unfolded, I realized this wasn't just about justice or clearing a man's name. It was about reclaiming our lives from fear, about refusing to let power silence the truth. The outcome was still uncertain. The world doesn't always reward the brave or the foolish. But for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. So, if you've ever stood at the edge of a choice and wondered if you had the courage to jump, wondered if love or justice or simple decency was worth risking everything, then you know where I'm coming from. Sometimes it takes a wild horse, a stranger's whisper, and the willingness to stand up when the world says sit down. Tell me, would you risk it all for what you believe is right? Would you fight for a truth the world's too afraid to hear? Let me know in the comments, because out here, in Cinder Valley or anywhere else, that's a story worth telling.